On August 7, 1942, vessels of the United States Navy Task Force 61 approached the shoreline of Guadalcanal Island in the Solomon Islands chain. At approximately 0900 hours, elements of the 1st Marine Division under Major General Alexander Archer Vandergrift began amphibious assault operations at Lunga Point. The objective? Seizure of a partially completed Japanese airfield that intelligence designated as a strategic threat to Allied supply lines connecting the United States to Australia. The landing force comprised approximately 11,000 Marines from the 1st and 5th Marine Regiments, supported by naval gunfire from cruisers and destroyers. Opposition at the landing beaches proved minimal. Japanese construction personnel, primarily civilian contractors and naval infantry numbering approximately 2,800 combined, withdrew into the island's interior rather than contest the beachhead. By 1600 hours on the first day, Marine units had secured the airfield perimeter with negligible casualties. This operation, designated Watchtower, represented the first major Allied offensive ground operation in the Pacific Theater. Strategic planners in Washington had identified control of this airfield as essential for interdicting Japanese maritime traffic and establishing forward air bases for subsequent operations northward through the Solomon Islands chain. The airfield itself measured approximately 3,800 feet in length at the time of capture, with construction approximately 60% complete, according to captured Japanese engineering documents. American engineers immediately began completion work, reinforcing the runway surface and constructing revetments for aircraft protection. Within 72 hours, the field became operational for fighter aircraft. If you appreciate detailed, evidence-based World War II history, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. We'd like to know where our audience is located. The island's geography presented significant operational challenges. Guadalcanal extends approximately 90 miles in length and 25 miles at maximum width. The interior features mountainous terrain reaching elevations above 8,000 feet, covered in dense tropical rainforest. Coastal areas consist of kunai grass plains, coconut groves, and mangrove swamps. The climate is equatorial. Temperatures consistently exceed 85 degrees Fahrenheit with relative humidity above 90% year-round. Marine units established a defensive perimeter extending approximately 7 miles along the coast and 3 miles inland, centered on the captured airfield. Defensive positions consisted of foxholes, machine gun emplacements, and barbed wire obstacles. Artillery batteries from the 11th Marine Regiment established firing positions with overlapping coverage of likely approach routes. Initial supply operations proceeded according to plan until the night of August 8-9, when Japanese naval forces executed a devastating counterattack at sea. At approximately 0130 hours on August 9, 1942, a Japanese naval force under Vice Admiral Gunichi Mikawa executed a surprise night attack against Allied vessels screening the Guadalcanal beachhead. Mikawa's force consisted of 5 heavy cruisers, Chokai, Aoba, Kako, Kinugasa, and Furutaka, plus 2 light cruisers and 1 destroyer, having departed Rabaul 36 hours earlier. Approaching through the passage between Savo Island and Guadalcanal, the Japanese force achieved complete tactical surprise. Lookouts aboard Allied screening vessels detected the Japanese formation only minutes before engagement commenced at ranges below 5,000 yards. Japanese long-lance torpedoes and naval gunfire struck 4 Allied heavy cruisers in rapid succession. USS Astoria suffered multiple 8-inch shell hits that ignited fuel and ammunition stores. The vessel capsized and sank approximately 6 hours after the initial engagement. USS Quincy took between 50 and 80 shell hits, according to different accounts, sinking at approximately 02:35 hours. USS Vincennes sustained heavy damage from gunfire and torpedoes, sinking around 02:50 hours. HMAS Canberra, operating with the Southern Screening Force, absorbed more than 24 shell hits and remained dead in the water, until scuttled by Allied forces later that morning. Total Allied casualties exceeded 1,000 killed. The Japanese force sustained minimal damage. Chokai received 3 shell hits causing minor casualties. Admiral Mikawa withdrew northward rather than proceeding to attack the vulnerable transport vessels still unloading supplies, a decision that remains controversial among naval historians. The tactical defeat forced withdrawal of Allied naval forces from the Guadalcanal area, leaving Marine ground units ashore with approximately 50% of their intended supplies and equipment. Food stocks sufficient for approximately 37 days remained ashore. Ammunition reserves varied by type. Small arms ammunition appeared adequate, but artillery shells and mortar rounds faced potential shortages. This naval engagement demonstrated Japanese superiority in night surface combat, a capability developed through intensive training in night operations and effective use of optical sighting equipment. Long-lance torpedoes, powered by oxygen rather than compressed air, left minimal wake and carried warheads substantially larger than American equivalents. Following the American seizure of the airfield, which Japanese forces had designated as Lunga Airfield, Imperial General Headquarters in Tokyo ordered immediate counteroffensive operations. Responsibility fell to the 17th Army, headquartered at Rabaul in New Britain, under Lieutenant General Harukichi Hyakutake. Available forces for immediate deployment consisted primarily of Colonel Kiyonao Ichiki's 28th Infantry Regiment, an elite unit that had been stationed near Guam, preparing for operations subsequently cancelled after the Battle of Midway. The regiment's first echelon, numbering 917 officers and men, received orders to proceed to Guadalcanal via high-speed destroyer transport and recapture the airfield. Japanese intelligence estimates at this time assessed American strength at approximately 2,000 troops, an underestimate of roughly 80% of actual Marine forces present. This intelligence failure stemmed from limited aerial reconnaissance and an assumption that American forces would not commit substantial resources to operations in the Solomons during 1942. Colonel Ichiki, age 44, graduated from the Imperial Japanese Army Academy in 1920 and had served in multiple campaigns in China. Contemporary accounts from subordinates describe him as aggressive and confident in Japanese tactical superiority over Western forces. He received explicit orders from 17th Army Headquarters to await the arrival of the regiment's second echelon before conducting offensive operations. On the night of August 18-19, 6 destroyers, Oite Asanagi Yugiri, Shirakumo Amagiri and Tanikaze, transported Ichiki's force from Truk Atoll to Taivu Point, approximately 22 miles east of the American defensive perimeter. The landing operation proceeded without detection by American forces. By dawn on August 19th, all 9Ma-17 troops had reached shore with their equipment, consisting primarily of small arms, machine guns, and limited mortar support. Immediately upon landing, Ichiki dispatched reconnaissance patrols westward toward the American positions. His orders to these patrols have not survived in accessible records, but standard Japanese doctrine called for detailed reconnaissance of enemy strength, dispositions, and defensive arrangements prior to conducting attacks. On August 19, 1942, a reinforced rifle platoon from A Company, 1st Battalion, 1st Marine Regiment, conducted a reconnaissance patrol eastward from the American defensive perimeter. The patrol, numbering approximately 60 Marines under Captain Charles H. Brush, had orders to investigate reports of Japanese activity in the Coley Point area. At approximately 1200 hours, the patrol encountered a Japanese force moving westward along the coastal track. The Japanese unit consisted of approximately 35 soldiers, likely a reconnaissance element from Ichiki's regiment, though definitive identification remains uncertain in declassified action reports. The engagement lasted approximately 20 minutes. Marine small arms fire killed 31 Japanese soldiers, according to the official after-action report. 4 Marines sustained wounds, none fatal. Significantly, Marine personnel recovered documents from Japanese casualties, including maps and unit identification papers. Intelligence personnel examining these documents at 1st Marine Division headquarters identified the presence of a regiment strength force, specifically the 28th Infantry Regiment, in the Taivu Point area. The documents also contained Japanese intelligence estimates of American strength that revealed substantial underestimation of actual Marine numbers present. This intelligence reached General Vandergrift by approximately 1600 hours on August 19th. He immediately assessed that a Japanese attack would likely develop from the east, probably within 24 to 48 hours. The obvious approach route consisted of the coastal corridor, where terrain permitted formation movement, and where the Ilu River, misidentified as the Tanaru River in initial reports, created a potential obstacle for defense. General Vandergrift directed Colonel Clifton B. Cates, commanding the 1st Marine Regiment, to strengthen defensive positions along the Ilu River sandbar. This sandbar extended approximately 100 yards from the river mouth northward along the beach, creating a natural choke point where approaching forces would be channelized. Lieutenant Colonel Edwin A. Pollock's 2nd Battalion, 1st Marine Regiment, received orders to establish defensive positions along the west bank of the Ilu River on August 19-20, 1942. The battalion's strength at this time numbered approximately 940 officers and men organized into 3 rifle companies, plus headquarters and weapons company. Defensive arrangements followed standard Marine Corps doctrine for hasty defensive positions against expected enemy attack. Machine gun crews from the weapons company positioned 5 M19 and 17A1 Browning 30 caliber machine guns to create interlocking fields of fire across the sandbar. Each gun emplacement included overhead cover, sandbag protection, and pre-positioned ammunition stocks of approximately 1,500 rounds per gun. The M19-17A1 represented a First World War-era design modified for improved reliability. Water-cooled operation permitted sustained fire rates of 450-600 rounds per minute without barrel changes. Effective range against personnel targets exceeded 1,000 yards. Each gun required a crew of 3, gunner, assistant gunner, and ammunition bearer. Additional firepower came from 2 37mm M3 anti-tank guns positioned to cover the sandbar with canister rounds. These weapons, designed primarily for anti-armor work, proved effective against infantry when loaded with canister projectiles that functioned as large shotgun shells dispersing steel balls. Rifle companies occupied positions along a defensive line extending approximately 800 yards inland from the coast. Each squad prepared fighting positions with overhead cover and camouflage. Barbed wire obstacles were not in place due to time constraints. The defensive position was prepared in approximately 30 hours. Artillery support came from 75mm pack howitzers of the 11th Marine Regiment, positioned approximately 2,000 yards to the rear. Forward observer teams from the artillery battalion occupied positions with infantry units, equipped with SCR 610 radio sets for fire mission requests. The defensive plan called for allowing attacking forces to enter the killing zone on the sandbar before engaging with concentrated machine gun fire. Once the attack stalled under fire, artillery would deliver high explosive shells on enemy assembly areas, and rifle companies would conduct counterattacks to eliminate penetrations. Colonel Ichiki's tactical plan for the night of August 20-21, 1942, called for a direct frontal assault across the sandbar at the Ilu River mouth. Japanese military doctrine emphasized aggressive night attacks to overcome American firepower advantages through shock action and close combat, where Japanese infantry training supposedly provided superiority. Available records do not indicate that Ichiki conducted detailed reconnaissance of the American positions beyond initial observation of the river line. Whether this represented overconfidence or time pressure remains subject to historical interpretation. The attack commenced at approximately 0310 hours on August 21st. The initial assault wave consisted of approximately 200 soldiers advancing in company-strength formation across the sandbar. Japanese infantry carried Arisaka Type 38 rifles, Type 96 light machine guns, and Type 91 grenades. Officers carried swords and pistols, according to standard practice. Tactical doctrine called for advancing rapidly to close range, where American firepower became less effective and where Japanese proficiency in close combat could dominate. American defensive fire commenced when Japanese forces reached the center of the sandbar, approximately 50 yards from the western bank. 5 Browning machine guns opened simultaneous fire, delivering approximately 3,000 rounds per minute combined. Tracer rounds, loaded at intervals of 5 rounds, created visible streams of fire that allowed gunners to adjust aim onto target concentrations. The first assault wave suffered catastrophic casualties within the initial 2 minutes of engagement. Japanese soldiers fell in concentrations along the sandbar, with subsequent waves advancing over casualties from preceding groups. Some attackers reached the western bank and attempted to establish fighting positions, but rifle fire from Marine infantry prevented consolidation. Colonel Ichiki committed additional forces in successive waves throughout the night. Contemporary accounts from Marine defenders describe continuous attacks from approximately 0310 hours until 0600 hours, nearly 3 hours of sustained assault operations. Each wave produced similar results: heavy casualties from concentrated machine gun fire, minimal penetration of defensive lines, inability to sustain momentum. Artillery support from the 11th Marines delivered approximately 800 rounds of 75mm high explosive ammunition on suspected Japanese assembly areas east of the river. Forward observers called for fire missions based on observed concentrations and sounds of troop movement. The effectiveness of this artillery fire cannot be precisely determined from available records, but it likely contributed to disruption of Japanese attack coordination. At approximately 0630 hours on August 21, 1942, with daylight providing clear visibility, General Vandergrift ordered execution of a counterattack to eliminate remaining Japanese forces. Lieutenant Colonel Leonard B. Creswell's 1st Battalion, 1st Marine Regiment, which had been held in reserve, received orders to conduct a flanking movement south of the Ilu River to envelop Japanese positions. Simultaneously, 5 M3 Stuart light tanks from the 1st Tank Battalion crossed the sandbar to conduct direct fire support operations. These tanks, mounting 37mm main guns and 3 30-caliber machine guns each, proved effective against Japanese infantry who lacked adequate anti-tank weapons. Tank crews reported encountering concentrated groups of Japanese soldiers attempting to establish defensive positions in coconut groves east of the river. The engagement devolved into systematic elimination of isolated Japanese positions. Tank infantry coordination followed standard Marine Corps doctrine. Tanks identified and suppressed enemy positions with machine gun fire, while infantry maneuvered to assault. The tactic proved effective against an enemy lacking armor support or adequate anti-tank capabilities. By 1400 hours on August 21st, organized Japanese resistance had ceased. Marine personnel conducted battlefield clearance operations, counting casualties and recovering documents. The official casualty count listed approximately 800 Japanese dead. Additional casualties likely occurred in jungle areas east of the main battlefield, but could not be accurately assessed. American casualties totaled 35 killed and 75 wounded according to 1st Marine Division records. The disparity in casualty ratios, approximately 23.1, reflected the advantages of prepared defensive positions and superior firepower. Recovered documents included portions of regimental orders, personal diaries, and maps. Intelligence analysis revealed that Colonel Ichiki had committed virtually his entire force to the attack, despite orders to await reinforcements. Whether Ichiki died during the battle or committed suicide afterward remains unclear in accessible records. Different sources provide contradictory accounts. The tactical lessons from this engagement proved significant for both forces. American defenders validated the effectiveness of prepared positions with interlocking machine gun fire against night attacks. Japanese forces learned that frontal assaults against established defensive positions resulted in catastrophic casualties regardless of fighting spirit. Following the Ilu River defeat, Japanese military planners recognized that recapturing Guadalcanal required substantially larger forces delivered with more effective logistics. However, control of Henderson Field by American aircraft created a dilemma. Conventional transport vessels operating during daylight faced certain air attack. The solution became high-speed destroyer runs conducted during darkness, operations that American personnel nicknamed the Tokyo Express, or Rat Run. Between August 29 and September 4, 1942, Japanese destroyers transported approximately 5,000 troops of Major General Kiyotake Kawaguchi's 35th Infantry Brigade from Rabaul to Guadalcanal. Typical operations involved destroyers departing Shortland Islands in late afternoon, making the 300-mile transit at speeds exceeding 30 knots, unloading personnel at Taivu Point or Cape Esperance during darkness, then withdrawing before dawn to avoid air attack. This method succeeded in moving personnel, but imposed severe limitations on heavy equipment transport. Destroyers lacked cargo capacity for artillery pieces, vehicles, substantial ammunition stocks, or adequate food supplies. Troops arrived carrying personal weapons, limited ammunition, and minimal rations. Artillery support remained severely restricted. Most Japanese forces on Guadalcanal operated without effective field artillery throughout the campaign. American air attacks from Henderson Field occasionally intercepted destroyer runs, but Japanese Navy destroyers proved difficult targets. Their high speed, maneuverability, and formidable anti-aircraft armament made them survivable even when caught during daylight withdrawal. The strategic situation created asymmetrical advantages for both sides. Japan could reinforce ground forces under cover of darkness. America controlled daylight air operations and could interdict slow transport vessels. Neither side could achieve complete dominance, producing a grinding attritional campaign. Major General Kawaguchi's operational plan for recapturing Henderson Field involved a three-pronged attack scheduled for September 12–13, 1942. The main effort would advance from the south through dense jungle terrain, striking what Japanese intelligence assessed as weakly defended sectors of the American perimeter. Supporting attacks from the east and west would fix American forces and prevent reinforcement of threatened sectors. Kawaguchi personally led approximately 3,000 troops of the 35th Infantry Brigade's main body through jungle terrain, approaching from inland areas south of Henderson Field. The approach march covered approximately 12 miles of mountainous jungle without established trails. Troops carried weapons, ammunition, and minimal rations, typically 3 days' rice supply per man. The terrain challenged movement. Dense undergrowth limited visibility to a few yards. Steep ravines required frequent detours. Streams and swamps impeded progress. Daily advances averaged 2 to 3 miles. By September 12th, forward elements reached positions approximately 1 mile south of Henderson Field, occupying a coral ridge that dominated the surrounding terrain. American intelligence had anticipated this approach. On September 8th, Lieutenant Colonel Merritt A. Edson's 1st Raider Battalion conducted an amphibious raid on Tasimboko village and discovered extensive supply dumps indicating large-scale Japanese operations preparing in the area. Edson correctly assessed that Japanese forces would likely attack from the south along the ridge network. With General Vandergrift's approval, Edson established defensive positions on the key ridge south of Henderson Field on September 10–11. His force consisted of approximately 840 Marines from the Raider Battalion and 1st Parachute Battalion, specialized units with enhanced training but equipped identically to standard rifle battalions. Defensive arrangements followed principles proven at the Ilu River: machine guns positioned for interlocking fire, mortars registered on likely approach routes, artillery support pre-planned with forward observers positioned with infantry units. The ridge's terrain offered advantages. Steep approaches channelized attacking forces, and the narrow crest prevented enemy forces from deploying in width. Japanese attacks on Edson's Ridge commenced during darkness on September 12–13, 1942. Unlike the direct frontal assault at the Ilu River, this operation employed infiltration tactics. Small units advanced through ravines bordering the ridge, attempting to penetrate between defensive positions and envelop American strongpoints. Initial contact occurred at approximately 2100 hours when Japanese soldiers approached Marine positions from multiple directions simultaneously. Close-range firefights erupted along the defensive line. Japanese infantry tactics emphasized night combat proficiency. Troops moved quietly, used terrain effectively, and attempted to close to grenade and bayonet range where American firepower advantages decreased. Marine defensive fire included 60mm and 81mm mortars, delivering high explosive shells at ranges below 500 yards. Artillery support from the 11th Marine Regiment's 105mm Howitzer Battalion provided defensive fires, with shells landing within 200 yards of friendly positions. Forward observers directing these fires operated under extreme pressure. Incorrect coordinates would have resulted in casualties among defending forces. Throughout the night, Japanese forces achieved several penetrations of the marine defensive line. Counterattacks by local reserve forces contained these breakthroughs. Hand-to-hand combat occurred at multiple points. Marines employed rifles, pistols, knives, and entrenching tools. Japanese forces used bayonets, swords, and grenades. By dawn on September 13th, the Japanese attack had not achieved breakthrough. Colonel Edson, assessing that his forward positions were untenable against continued pressure, withdrew defending forces approximately 400 yards to secondary positions on the ridge's central hill. This shortened the defensive line, concentrated forces, and improved fields of fire. Japanese forces renewed attacks on the night of September 13-14. General Kawaguchi committed reserve forces in attempts to overwhelm the contracted American positions. Attacks came in successive waves throughout the night, with some penetrations reaching within 50 yards of Edson's command post before being stopped by direct fire. Artillery support intensified during the second night. The 11th Marines fired more than 1,500 rounds, delivering concentrations on suspected Japanese assembly areas and approach routes. At one critical juncture, naval gunfire from destroyers offshore supplemented land-based artillery, delivering 5-inch shells on Japanese positions identified by forward observers. By dawn on September 14th, Japanese offensive capability had collapsed. Casualties, exhaustion, and ammunition shortages prevented further attacks. American positions remained intact. Japanese forces withdrew southward into jungle areas. Casualty figures from Edson's Ridge indicated approximately 850 Japanese killed, based on battlefield counts conducted by Marine personnel. Wounded who withdrew with their units cannot be accurately assessed from available records, but standard military casualty ratios suggest approximately 300-400 additional wounded. American casualties totaled 104 killed and 278 wounded across both nights of fighting. The casualty exchange ratio, approximately 8.1, again favored American forces, but at substantially higher cost than the Ilu River engagement. This reflected the more sophisticated Japanese tactics and more challenging defensive terrain. Japanese tactical doctrine had proven inadequate against American defensive methods. Night attacks and infiltration tactics achieved local penetrations, but could not produce strategic breakthrough. American forces demonstrated capability to absorb limited penetrations and contain them with local counterattacks while maintaining overall defensive integrity. The critical factor remained firepower differential. American defenders could call upon mortars, artillery, and naval gunfire in concentrations that Japanese forces could not match. When Japanese attacks concentrated for breakthrough attempts, American fire support shattered them. When Japanese forces dispersed to infiltrate, American defensive positions in depth prevented exploitation. Logistical constraints increasingly affected Japanese operations. Troops on Guadalcanal received inadequate food supplies. Rice rations, intended at 850 grams per man per day, decreased to approximately 300 to 400 grams by late September. Ammunition resupply via destroyer runs provided limited quantities. Machine gun ammunition and artillery shells remained critically short throughout the campaign. Medical support for Japanese forces proved severely deficient. Wounded soldiers received minimal treatment. Antibiotics and surgical supplies arrived in quantities inadequate for casualties sustained. Disease began affecting combat effectiveness as malaria, dysentery, and tropical infections spread through units lacking preventive medicine and adequate nutrition. On October 13, 1942, transport vessels delivered the 164th Infantry Regiment of the American Division to Guadalcanal, providing General Vandergrift with approximately 3,000 additional troops. This marked the first U.S. Army ground combat unit deployed to Guadalcanal, expanding defending forces to approximately 23,000 American personnel. The 164th Infantry was a North Dakota National Guard unit federalized in February 1941. Training had emphasized conventional infantry tactics against European-style opponents. The regiment underwent limited jungle warfare preparation before deployment. Equipment included M1 Garand rifles, semi-automatic weapons providing advantages over bolt-action rifles in close combat. Integration of Army units into the Marine defensive perimeter required coordination of differing tactical doctrines and communications procedures. Marine and Army units employed different radio equipment and used different call signs and authentication procedures. Staff officers worked to standardize these systems during October. Japanese planners, aware that American reinforcements were arriving, prepared their largest offensive of the campaign. Lieutenant General Hyakutake personally traveled to Guadalcanal to command the operation, bringing headquarters elements of the 17th Army. The plan called for coordinated attacks from multiple directions, with the main effort striking from south of Henderson Field, similar to Kawaguchi's September operation, but with substantially larger forces. The Japanese offensive commenced on October 23, 1942, with a diversionary attack from the west, across the Matanikau River. This force included 9 Type 95 Hago light tanks, rare on Guadalcanal due to transport difficulties. These tanks mounted 37mm main guns and 2 7.7mm machine guns. American defenders, including elements of the newly arrived 164th Infantry Regiment, engaged the tank infantry attack with 37mm anti-tank guns and artillery. All 9 Japanese tanks were destroyed within approximately 2 hours. The attack collapsed with heavy casualties, achieving no penetration of American defensive lines. The main assault began on the night of October 24-25, involving approximately 5,600 troops under Major General Yumio Nasu advancing from the south. They faced positions held by Lieutenant Colonel Louis B. Chesty Puller's 1st Battalion, 7th Marine Regiment, reinforced by elements of the 164th Infantry Regiment. Japanese attacks followed patterns established in previous operations: infiltration through jungle approaches, concentration for assault on identified defensive positions, attempts to achieve breakthrough through successive waves. American defensive responses likewise followed established patterns: interlocking machine gun fire, pre-registered mortar and artillery concentrations, immediate counterattacks against penetrations. The fighting continued throughout the night with exceptional intensity. Japanese forces achieved several significant penetrations, advancing to within 200 yards of Henderson Field's perimeter at one point. American artillery fired more than 5,000 rounds during the night. Naval vessels offshore contributed 5-inch gunfire on Japanese assembly areas. General Nasu was killed during the night, struck by machine gun fire while leading an attack personally. Command devolved to subordinates, who continued pressing attacks through the following night, October 25-26. Results remained similar: heavy Japanese casualties, minimal territorial gains. American defensive lines maintained. By dawn on October 26th, the offensive had failed. Japanese casualties exceeded 2,000 killed. American losses totaled approximately 86 killed and 200 wounded. The casualty exchange ratio favored American forces, but at higher cost than previous engagements, reflecting the scale and intensity of Japanese attacks. Naval engagements during November 12-15, 1942 decisively shifted the campaign's strategic balance. Japanese planners organized a major convoy operation to deliver the 38th Division with heavy equipment and substantial supplies. Supporting naval forces included battleships intended to bombard Henderson Field and neutralize American air operations. On the night of November 12-13, American cruisers and destroyers under Rear Admiral Daniel J. Callahan intercepted a Japanese force, including battleships Hiei and Kirishima, approaching Guadalcanal. The engagement occurred at extremely close range, less than 3,000 yards in some instances, with confused night action lasting approximately 35 minutes. American forces lost 2 light cruisers and 4 destroyers. 3 additional destroyers sustained heavy damage. Rear Admiral Callahan and Rear Admiral Norman Scott both died during the action, the only U.S. flag officers killed in surface naval combat during World War II. However, the Japanese battleship Hiei sustained multiple shell hits, causing fires and steering damage. Aircraft from Henderson Field attacked Hiei the following morning, ultimately sinking the battleship. On November 14-15, the battleship Kirishima attempted another bombardment mission, but was intercepted by USS Washington and USS South Dakota. Washington's fire control radar directed accurate gunnery that placed 9 16-inch shells into Kirishima at ranges exceeding 8,000 yards. Hiroshima sank with heavy casualties. Perhaps most significantly, American aircraft and naval forces destroyed the majority of transport vessels attempting to deliver the 38th Division. Of 11 transports, only 4 reached Guadalcanal, and these were destroyed by artillery and air attack before completing unloading. Japanese casualties from the convoy exceeded 5,000 troops. These naval victories ensured American control of sea approaches to Guadalcanal during daylight. Japanese destroyer runs could still deliver limited personnel and supplies during darkness, but large-scale reinforcement with heavy equipment became impossible. By November 1942, Japanese forces on Guadalcanal faced catastrophic supply shortages. Approximately 30,000 troops occupied positions around the American perimeter, but food supplies reaching these forces averaged approximately 20% of required levels. Rice rations decreased to 1 bowl per day, approximately 150-200 grams, providing roughly 600 calories. Medical records captured after the campaign indicated that malaria infection rates exceeded 70% among Japanese troops. Dysentery affected virtually all personnel. Beriberi, caused by vitamin B deficiency, produced widespread symptoms, including edema and cardiovascular problems. Tropical ulcers, infected wounds that failed to heal in humid conditions, affected thousands. A Japanese medical officer's report from late November, captured by American forces in subsequent operations, described conditions in field hospitals. More than 60% of personnel incapacitated. Daily deaths exceed 50. No medicines available. Can only provide burial when strength permits. Similar reports from other units painted consistent pictures of medical collapse. Combat effectiveness deteriorated proportionally. Units authorized 2,000 troops reported effective strength below 500. Soldiers lacked energy for sustained operations. Ammunition shortages prevented training or combat operations except when absolutely necessary. Artillery units conserved shells to the point that some batteries possessed fewer than 10 rounds per gun. American intelligence, through interrogation of prisoners and examination of captured documents, gained understanding of Japanese logistical collapse, but not its full extent. Estimates placed Japanese effective combat strength at approximately 10,000–12,000 troops, assessments that proved roughly accurate. On December 31, 1942, Imperial General Headquarters issued orders to evacuate Guadalcanal. The decision acknowledged that continuing operations would result in complete destruction of the 17th Army without strategic benefit. Approximately 11,000 Japanese troops remained on the island, of whom perhaps 7,000 could walk without assistance. The evacuation, designated Operation KE, employed destroyer runs similar to Tokyo Express operations, but for personnel extraction rather than delivery. Japanese planners organized deception operations to suggest continued reinforcement while actually withdrawing troops. Destroyer runs on the nights of February 1, 4 and 7, 1943 evacuated approximately 10,650 personnel. American forces detected unusual naval activity but did not initially recognize its purpose. Some intelligence officers assessed that Japan was reinforcing Guadalcanal for renewed offensives. The evacuation represented one of the few successful Japanese operations of the campaign. Nearly all soldiers physically capable of reaching evacuation points were extracted. Those too sick or wounded to move were typically provided grenades for suicide, a practice consistent with Japanese military culture that viewed capture as ultimate dishonor. American forces discovered the evacuation on February 9th when patrols encountered abandoned positions. General Alexander Patch, who had replaced Vandergrift in December, sent the message, "Tokyo Express no longer has terminus on Guadalcanal." The Guadalcanal Campaign's strategic significance extended beyond territorial control. It represented the first sustained ground combat where American forces defeated Japanese troops in offensive and defensive operations. The campaign established patterns and exposed realities that influenced subsequent Pacific War operations. Japanese casualties totaled approximately 25,000 to 31,000 from all causes. Combat deaths numbered approximately 14,800. Disease and starvation killed 10,000–15,000 additional troops. Naval and air casualties added roughly 3,500 personnel. Material losses included 2 battleships, 1 heavy cruiser, 3 light cruisers, 11 destroyers, 6 submarines, and more than 600 aircraft. American casualties included approximately 1,600 ground forces killed in action, 4,200 wounded, and several thousand temporarily disabled by disease. Naval losses totaled 2 heavy carriers, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 14 destroyers. Aircraft losses exceeded 400. However, American industrial production replaced these losses within months while simultaneously expanding overall force strength. The campaign demonstrated several operational realities. Control of airfields proved decisive for maritime operations. Aircraft operating from Henderson Field interdicted Japanese shipping during daylight throughout the campaign. Logistics determined operational sustainability. Japanese forces consistently lacked adequate supplies despite tactical competence. Firepower concentration provided decisive advantages in defensive operations. American forces consistently inflicted disproportionate casualties when fighting from prepared positions. Japanese military doctrine proved inadequate against American defensive methods and firepower advantages. Emphasis on offensive spirit and close combat could not overcome systematic disadvantages in artillery support, air cover, and logistical sustainment. Recognition of these realities occurred among some Japanese officers, but did not translate into doctrinal reform. For American forces, Guadalcanal validated amphibious assault doctrine, demonstrated effectiveness of combined arms coordination, and proved that American troops could match Japanese forces in sustained jungle combat. The campaign provided experience that informed subsequent operations throughout the Pacific. The island itself bore combat scars for decades. Wrecked equipment, crashed aircraft, and unexploded ordnance remained scattered across jungle areas and coastal plains. Henderson Field continued operations as a major Allied airbase through 1945, supporting subsequent operations in the Solomon Islands and beyond. The Guadalcanal Campaign from August 1942 through February 1943 marked a fundamental transition in the Pacific War. Japanese forces suffered their first major ground defeat in sustained operations. American forces demonstrated capability to conduct complex amphibious assaults, sustain operations in extremely harsh environments, and defeat determined opponents through systematic application of material advantages and effective doctrine. The campaign's lessons influenced subsequent operations throughout the Pacific theater. American forces refined amphibious assault techniques, improved jungle warfare tactics, and validated the importance of air superiority and logistics. Japanese forces faced the reality that courage and tactical skill could not overcome systematic disadvantages in industrial capacity and operational sustainment. Veterans of Guadalcanal on both sides carried their experiences throughout the war and beyond. American Marines and soldiers who survived the campaign became instructors and cadre for subsequent units. Japanese survivors dispersed to other theaters, many dying in subsequent defeats, as Japan's strategic position continued deteriorating. The campaign's significance in World War II history remains substantial. It demonstrated that Allied forces could conduct successful offensive operations against Japan, provided hope during a period when Axis powers appeared dominant, and established the operational patterns that would characterize the Pacific War through 1945.